Today we're going to talk about the tragic Gumball 3000 Macedonia crash, which was so bad that the entire event was cut short. If you aren't yet familiar with Gumball 3000, it's a rally which was set up in 1999 by entrepreneur Maximillion Cooper. But Gumball 3000 rallies were like no other. It was devised as an all-out 3,000-mile road trip across countries and continents and would blend the worlds of ridiculously fast sports cars and supercars, eccentric celebrities and millionaires, and some of the wildest nights imaginable. And the 2007 Gumball rally was looking to be just like the others. As always, it was prohibitively expensive to participate in, with tickets for the 2007 Gumball 3000 rally costing 28 grand for a first-time driver. With the barrier to entry so high, it's unsurprising that a vast majority of the cars entered were about as exotic as they come. This year, the route involved cutting through 16 countries in 8 days, with many drivers expected to drive for over 15 hours a day before ending the night with an extravagant party which had been organised at set locations in advance. The huge parties each night basically acted as checkpoints for the drivers and would allow them to at least somewhat stay in the same vicinity as each other. Unfortunately, by design, this was a double-edged sword. Whilst the organisers' motto was, "It's not a race, it's a rally," and it wasn't a timed event like any traditional race, it was still the perfect environment for high-speed mayhem on public roads. If you've ever been to an impromptu car meet, you'll know how quickly even a small gathering of cars can turn into a pissing contest and cause the police to get involved. Turns out the same remains true if the cars are 10 times more expensive. Of course, when Gumball had their very sensible sounding PR hat on, they would publicly disavow high-speed driving and would of course place the legal responsibility of any driving offences solely on the participants. This very sensible sounding motto was contrasted by the demanding schedule of the rally, in which the long distances between checkpoints would make speeding almost a requirement. Regardless, I don't think being pedantic when it comes to an event like this is entirely necessary, since we all know what's going to happen regardless of whatever efforts the organisers make. It's just the nature of the beast. Back to the 2007 rally specifically, or the 9th edition of the Gumball 3000. It started in London on Sunday, April the 29th at Pall Mall. The starting grid featured well over 100 vehicles, 3 Veyrons, an Enzo and an astoundingly cheap at the time Carrera GT were in the mix. Pairing all these supercars with a pretty big list of household names including Danny Dyer was certainly enough to draw a pretty sizable crowd. This year, the loop was going to go from London to Istanbul and back, with notable stop points in Amsterdam, Munich, Tirana, Dubrovnik and Athens. Among the participants of the rally were Nicholas Morley, a 30-year-old property entrepreneur from Cheshire, and Matthew McConville, his co-driver from Manchester. Entering with a black Tech Art Porsche 997 Turbo, as if a 997 Turbo was too common or something. Now, right from the beginning, the 2007 Gumball 3000 would prove to face some issues. Law enforcement knew about the rally, obviously, and based on the event's previous history, they decided to pay very close attention this time. In Germany, for example, police started indiscriminately pulling over many of the participants, often preemptively. In the Netherlands, it was even worse. Dutch police saw it fit to seize 2 of the cars for traffic offences, and 7 drivers, including the rapper Exhibit, had their licences taken away for being caught at least 30 miles an hour over the limit. These penalties weren't just a little slap on the wrist, these were serious infractions, suggesting that, lo and behold, many of the drivers racing supercars were going fast. Now, I'm absolutely not advocating for speeding in any way, but as I seemingly say in so many of my videos, time and place is so important. Creeping over the limit on a huge, empty dual carriageway or motorway with clear, well-maintained roads is completely different to, a developing Eastern European country with narrow, worn-out old roads, for example. I don't know. What about Macedonia? On the afternoon of Wednesday, May the 2nd, 2007, the rally would traverse through Macedonia. The participants were headed from the Greek borders to Tirana, Albania. At around 4 in the afternoon, disaster struck. A fatal collision on the M4 near Struga, just 6 miles from the border to Albania. Nicholas Morley was at the wheel of 997 Turbo with Matthew sat beside him. In the other vehicle, an old VW Golf, sat a local elderly couple, 67-year-old Vladimir Chepenyoski and his wife Margit Chepenyoska. Unfortunately, the couple's old Golf was no match for the cutting-edge 997, and over the following couple of days, both Vladimir and Margit would both sadly pass away. So, what exactly happened? As soon as the crash took place, two completely conflicting stories would emerge. Firstly, there's the account of the incident according to Macedonian police and prosecutors. Their story was based on statements from witnesses of the crash who gave their accounts at a nearby petrol station to authorities. This version of events claims the Porsche was travelling extremely fast, veered onto the wrong side of the road and smashed into the Golf head-on. In the trial that followed, the prosecution claims Nicholas was speeding at around 100 miles an hour at the time of the crash, which was over double the speed limit. Nicholas and his defence team, as well as the organisers of Gumball 3000, had a very different story. This story instead places the blame on the couple in the Golf, which allegedly pulled out suddenly in front of Nicholas after joining the road from a side road, ignoring that Nicholas had right of way. Nicholas Morley said he didn't see the Golf in time to react because he didn't stop at the intersection and his view of the road may have been covered by trees. In this account, it's claimed that Nicholas was going at a much more sensible 70 to 75 kilometres, or about 50 miles an hour, a little bit less, as opposed to around 165. This side claims Nicholas swerved left in an attempt to avoid crashing into the Golf but failed. Regardless of which of these two recollections is accurate, the outcome was catastrophic. Part of the reason two different accounts of the events persist is because the sheer force of the impact was enough to throw both cars off the road and into an adjacent field. While Nicholas and Matthew had a relatively large car with cutting-edge safety features to keep them safe, the humble Golf fared much worse, and poor Vladimir and Margit would sustain life-threatening injuries from the crash, and both needed to be taken to hospital. The days following on from the crash were complete chaos, the impact of the crash extending far beyond solely affecting the families of Vladimir and Margit, shaking the entire Gumball organisation to its core. According to the Macedonian police and several news reports, Nicholas and Matthew left the scene almost right away. Allegedly, a fellow Gumball participant driving a BMW M6 registered in Russia picked them up. Shortly afterwards, they were apprehended by border guards at the border with Albania. This, understandably, was seen by the public as a cowardly attempt by some privileged millionaires to escape the consequences of their actions. At the time, with the widespread news coverage, the public were downright outraged by the events which had just unfolded. Nicholas's legal team, as well as representatives from Gumball, denied the hit-and-run accusation. Instead, they claimed that Nicholas and Matthew remained at the scene until emergency services arrived. They claimed that they only left the site of the crash after being surrounded by a large, aggressive crowd. Supposedly, their intention of leaving the crash site was to head to the border and report the accident to the authorities. It was at this point that they were taken to custody. Gumball 3000 themselves drew a lot of criticism after the crash. Despite two participants being arrested and one of the two completely innocent people with nothing to do with the rally having passed away, the rally continued. On the evening of the crash, Gumball officials and drivers attended an event in Albania and partied. Maximillion Cooper, the founder, ended up defending this decision and said he was aware of the accident but not its severity. He claimed that Macedonian authorities had told him the old couple were, quote, okay. The public was skeptical of this take, and many saw this as a blatant attempt to just cover his arse. The following evening, on May the 3rd, it was finally announced that the 2007 Gumball 3000 rally would be cancelled. Cooper put out an official public statement announcing that this decision had been made as a mark of respect, and the rally would finish in Bratislava, Slovakia. In the statement, they expressed their deepest sympathies for Vladimir and Margit. Tragedy struck again the following day on the 4th after Margit passed away as well in hospital from her injuries. She passed away just minutes before her husband's funeral was set to begin. After being taken into custody, Matthew was released without charge, and he was allowed to return back home since he wasn't the driver. Nicholas Morley, the driver, remained at the centre of the investigation. Surprisingly, he was released on bail for just £17,000, and his passport was returned to him. Despite it looking at first like Nicholas had somehow got out in the clear, the passing of Margit just hours afterwards raised his charges. It was at this point that authorities realised that Nicholas has phoned in a private jet to get him out of the country. Allegedly. Whilst at the airport, a border officer recognised him and he was arrested all over again. This move didn't look good for Nicholas at all. It's quite hard to do something like that and for people not to perceive it as a blatant attempt to escape the country. This also didn't help his defence, where he attempted to claim full cooperation. This move ended up reinforcing the narrative of the authorities, who saw what he allegedly did as a bit of a hit and run. Interestingly, this was one time when Nicholas's wealth proved not to work in his favour, since it did align with the stereotype of a rich foreigner trying to throw their money around to avoid the consequences of their actions. Whilst awaiting his trial, Nicholas was kept in prison for 40 days. The police were accusing him of heavy violation of traffic safety and failure to provide help to an injured person, with their final charge for which he was being tried being endangering traffic leading to death. Initially, the media went overboard, claiming he was facing up to 14 years, but this was extremely unlikely. It was more probable that he was up to face 4 or 5. Eventually, he faced a long trial where the prosecution held firm in accusing him of driving recklessly, whilst Nicholas and his lawyers brought out 2 witnesses to back up their claim that Nicholas was going under 50 miles an hour. As you'd probably expect, there was a lot of back and forth, but quite remarkably, the daughter of Vladimir and Margit got involved in the trial and submitted a statement. Surprisingly, the family said that they forgave Nicholas for the accident. In the statement, they said they didn't believe Nicholas intended to cause the crash, and he should be released and allowed to return home. Not only did they possibly spare him from jail time, but they also withdrew their civil claim of £100,000 in damages. In the beginning of June 2007, Nicholas was found guilty. The judge let him off lightly with a 2-year suspended sentence, in large part due to the statement from the victim's family. He was released from custody and allowed to return home to England. Ultimately, this crash was huge news at the time and didn't do Gumball any favours. It was represented by the media as being a story of a rich, arrogant foreigner causing a fatal accident before getting to run away and avoid the consequences. In the news, Nicholas was presented as being a, quote, millionaire property developer, which didn't do him any favours in the eyes of the public. It's important to emphasise just how unpopular Nicholas and Gumball were after all this happened. Even in online forums for petrolheads, he was ridiculed and criticised for his actions. Equally, the popularity and reputation of Gumball was significantly tarnished too, with many seeing it as a largely selfish event which ruins the lives of innocent road users with no involvement in the event. The fallout from this crash was colossal, and the media decided to crucify Nicholas. This negative PR had severe effects on Gumball as well, and Adidas was one of the biggest sponsors of the rally at the time, but they decided to pull out after this. It also signalled to other corporate sponsors that working with Gumball could be a brand risk. So, what happened to Gumball and what happened to Nicholas? Thankfully, Gumball 3000 survived, but it had to undergo some significant changes to make the event more responsible and sustainable. This was met with a very small amount of pushback from a small but vocal minority of fans who felt it had gone soft, but the opinion that this was a much needed change was almost unanimous after the crash. Not that they had much of a choice. After the tragedy in Macedonia, law enforcement were paying much closer attention to the Gumball 3000 rallies, and in some areas the drivers were just escorted by police. They just weren't trusted to, go about their business on their own. The 2007 rally ultimately ended the era of legally dubious races with massive parties every night. This era of Gumball was over and was replaced by a still fun but a lot more responsible event. So that's Gumball. It survived. You know, the PR wasn't brilliant at the time, but thankfully they saw the error in their ways and decided to make some appropriate changes, which has ended up really helping them from a longevity standpoint. You know, I don't think Gumball ever really is mentioned in a negative light in the news these days. It's more so just seen as quite a fun, nice event. So that's Gumball. What about Nicholas Morley? Well, over the last 18 years or so, he's thankfully managed to stay out of the limelight for the most part, bar one or two interesting events. In 2017, Nicholas was back in the news again. He was named as the primary suspect in a bizarre criminal case in Aspen, Colorado. A man was caught on camera going into an art gallery and slashing a $3 million painting titled Untitled 2004 by Christopher Wool. The painting was owned by a trust which belonged to Nicholas's dad, Harold Morley. An arrest warrant was issued and he was charged with felony criminal mischief, which he denied. I just want to clarify, I'm not making this video with the intention of going in on Nicholas Morley. I think he's been crucified by the media. I mean, they were utterly relentless around the time of this crash, and I'm almost certain it pretty significantly affected his business, probably ruined his life for at least several years. I think the guy has suffered enough with the consequences of his actions. And legally speaking, it's in a weird grey area where he was found guilty, but is still absolutely adamant that he wasn't responsible for the crash. I've tried really hard to put across both accounts of what actually happened in this video because I feel it would be unreasonable to only represent one side or the other. I don't know who's telling the truth, to be honest. I don't know whether it's Nicholas, I don't know whether it's the prosecution. We might never actually know. It might possibly be something in the middle. That's why I'm trying my absolute hardest to emphasize this is still a relatively grey incident. With that being said, thank you so much for watching, and hopefully I'll catch you in the next video.